Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. Welcome to the 1T.org US webinar, a conversation on carbon markets. Very excited to have this really, I think, timely and engaging dialogue with some of our key partners and some thought leaders from across the 1T.org US platform. We're going to give folks about another 30 seconds to 1 minute to get logged in and get started. But we will commence shortly with this really engaging and excited about the conversation. Okay, well, I've got 12:01 and I know we've got a lot to discuss today. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Kevin O'Hara. I am the lead for 1T.org US. The 1T.org US chapter is a partnership between American Forests and the World Economic Forum, devoted to bringing together public, private, and NGO leaders in showing how trees and forests could be a solution for our twin biodiversity and climate crises. We have 67 pledges from leading states, from leading Fortune 100 companies, from private sector entities across the spectrum, NGOs, who are all leading and who have all made significant pledges to conserve, restore, and grow trees and forests, again, to solve those twin biodiversity and climate crises. So the pledges are our initial sort of entryway to joining the 1T.org US chapter. But beyond that, we are excited to bring together these leaders through our community collaborative, where we host public webinars like this one, and then invite-only dialogues in person and virtually throughout the year on topics like innovative finance for forests, carbon markets, and beyond. So if your organization has not yet made a pledge to the 1T.org US chapter, we would welcome your leadership. We'd welcome you to join Michigan State and Symbiosis Coalition members and American Forest Foundation, who you'll hear from today, as leaders in this movement to show what we and the US can do for our trees and for our forests around the world. So this week, we're really excited to bring together a dialogue around carbon markets. I think as we've seen this week alone with a massive announcement from Microsoft, with new news from UNEP around the opportunities therein and crowding private sector finance to close that $711 billion gap for financing nature, that it seems like for the first time in quite some time, there is a little wind behind the sails of the carbon markets. And today we are excited to have some of the really smartest people in this space join us to talk a little bit more about how and what they are doing, their organizations, the federal government, and others are doing to ensure that we have high-functioning, high-integrity carbon markets to do what we all believe they can and should do for financing nature. So we had slated to have some friends from the White House Council on Environmental Quality join us. Unfortunately, they had a last-minute scheduling snafu that prevented them from joining us. But we look forward to working closely with CEQ and USDA as they continue to talk about what high-integrity carbon markets look like from the US government's perspective. But we are really excited about our panel today. Nate Truitt, Daniel Ortega-Pacheco, and Julia Strong, three of the brightest minds in the public, private, and NGO spaces around carbon markets, are here today to lend us some of their thoughts, some of their expertise, and to lead us on this dialogue about where we see the carbon markets going and what we've seen in the past 6 to 12 months that may give us some glimmers of hope. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Nate Truitt from American Forest Foundation. Nate's the Vice President of Climate Funding. And Nate's got, if you're like me and you are on LinkedIn quite a bit, Nate's one of your go-to guys on LinkedIn for everything on forest carbon. So Nate, thanks for joining us and really kicking things off with some of your perspectives on where the markets are and where they're headed.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. First of all, really happy to join. I'm very happy to speak on behalf of the White House. You guys can all take with a grain of salt whether I have adequately spoken on their behalf. But I think what I want to do today is talk a little bit about why a carbon market, because I think we often skip over that. So just 1 minute on that, then to go through a little bit of how that market has developed, what the current prognosis is for it. And then I want to talk about the actions the US government has taken to sort of signal its support for the carbon market, particularly recently. And I'll end up by just talking about the roles we all have to play in facilitating the growth of this market. First, really quickly, about American Forest Foundation. We're a national conservation nonprofit dedicated to the sustainability of America's family-owned forests. Families and individuals own about 40% of US forests, which is more than the government or private industry. And they need tools and financial support to manage their woods effectively. We wear two hats regarding the carbon market. The first hat is we are a forest carbon project developer. And the second hat is what we call a market-making hat, which is policy innovation and advocacy to try and figure out how to make that market grow. And those two hats are linked. We like to test things in an actual project context on the ground, and then we use those learnings to inform the policy advocacy that we do that will hopefully lead to a market for everyone, not just our own particular project. So with that, let's talk about the voluntary carbon market for a second. The first word I want to talk about is voluntary. The market is voluntary in the sense that any individual or any company can choose whether or not to participate. But what I want to suggest to you all is that the carbon market is not voluntary for the planet. It provides a very important function that no other entity or feasible strategy provides. And that is, it finances, first of all, natural climate solutions, which in the next decade, this critical decade, could provide up to 30% of the needed climate mitigation in order to stay on a 1.5 degree pathway. So there is no credible 1.5 degree scenario that does not involve both avoiding the degradation of our existing natural carbon stocks, so think anti-deforestation measures, and the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using natural systems, think reforestation, and the eventual removal of additional carbon dioxide using technological removals and geologic storage. All three of those things are necessary for us to have any hope of a 1.5 degree scenario. They all require massive amounts of finance beyond that which is available from governments or the philanthropic sector. And so that is the missing piece of the climate action puzzle that voluntary carbon markets are designed to fill. And so I want to start with that because once we get into carbon markets, we have to acknowledge they're messy, they're in formation, they're confusing. There's a lot of rules yet to be written. There's a lot of questions yet to be answered. But we all have to keep in mind, while we're walking through that mess, they are absolutely necessary, not optional for the planet. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, voluntary carbon markets are the absolute worst way to enable climate action, except compared to all the other ways, right? So we all are going to have to live in this discomfort and go through it together because it is the only mechanism that exists to accomplish those goals. Okay, so let's talk about the state of the carbon markets. 2023, it's well known, was a year of immense challenge for the markets as a number of media and academic studies emerged, calling into question the integrity of the credits that were being transacted on the market, specifically from a controversial number of projects. In response, the market and its enablers in governments around the world began to institute a variety of initiatives to improve the integrity and the quality of the voluntary carbon market. Now, I say in response to those media, but in reality, that effort has been going on since 2020 and has grown out of the task force for scaling the voluntary carbon market, which was led by Mark Carney, and now is most ably represented by the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, which Daniel's going to talk about. So ever since that effort has gotten underway, we've seen really rapid improvement in terms of the agreement to principles of what carbon credits are and how they should be used, and signals from powerful actors, including the US government, which I'll get to in a second, that the voluntary carbon market really does have this crucial role to play, and they are ready to support it in playing that role. So that's where we are right now. We have sort of an emerging consensus of the importance of this tool in our struggle to maintain a 1.5-degree pathway. And we have increasingly clear, sophisticated, robust guidance coming from a variety of areas about how the market should function. So that's putting the market on a path for rapid growth. So that's sort of the overall direction that we're headed in. However, there are many, many challenges in front of us that we have to work through. No one should feel like this market is perfect as is. We've all got a lot of work to do collectively. With that, let me turn quickly to what the US government is doing. First of all, as you're all probably aware, a couple of weeks ago, they had a multi-agency announcement where they laid out the principles for high integrity, high functioning carbon markets according to the US government view. It was very encouraging that their principles aligned almost perfectly with the principles and work of the ICVCM that they have done globally. So this is a sign that stakeholders are converging on a common set of definitions, and that eventually we're going to have one rule book of how to use these tools. Beyond that announcement, though, there's a lot of other things that the US government has been doing. The CFTC last December announced principles that sort of pointed to potential regulation in the future around carbon markets. And I think sort of serve to put everyone on notice that the government does believe there is some regulatory function that they can play. Personally, as a carbon market participant, I welcome that. This is a market that really needs not light, deft, but some regulation. Third, you've seen a lot of state level regulation, most notably in California. Not all of it good, by the way, but the attempt of agencies and legislators to figure out what is this tool, how can it be used responsibly, what guardrails do we want to put around it. Fourth, you've seen the increasing subsidization of this market from various federal agencies. So the Department of Energy is doing a lot to help catalyze the growth of technological removals. The US Department of Agriculture has subsidized a number of projects that will eventually potentially produce carbon credits, and in that way is helping that market get off the ground. Internationally, USAID does a lot of work helping to de-risk carbon projects and crowd in private investment. So that's something that's happening. The overall view of the US government, especially heading into COP29, is becoming increasingly clear that carbon markets are a critical tool in both turning the ambition of the Paris Climate Accords into real action, and perhaps more importantly, in closing the massive finance gap that currently exists between the projects that are getting funding today and all the projects that we need to get funding in order to get on that 1.5-degree trajectory. And then finally, the thing I'd point out, in a hopeful signal, a lot of this is sort of administrative action, but there is actually an emerging bipartisan interest from both sides of the aisle in legislation or in approaches that could help catalyze these markets. I would point you to the Rural Forest Markets Act, or RFMA, as an example of that. That's a piece of legislation with both Republican and Democratic sponsors that would enable USDA to provide loan or bond guarantees to de-risk carbon projects and crowd in private investments. So, and I think you'll see more interest on the part of policymakers from both sides in these sort of approaches, because these projects don't only produce climate benefits, right? They produce rural economic benefits, they produce recreational benefits, they produce benefits to conservation and wildlife habitat, and the list goes on and on and on. So they really do tend to be win-win-win solutions that generate support from a wide range of stakeholders. I think the final thing I want to say is I just want to talk about the role you all have and we all have in promoting these markets, because the number one challenge I've encountered in this market is actors that are waiting on the sidelines, right? And I totally understand it, right? It's if you're a buyer of carbon credits, for example, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I don't want to buy or invest in carbon credits until I'm 100% sure that the credits I invest in are going to be able to be used for the use case that I have. If you're an investor, you want to make sure all the market uncertainty is sort of settled down. If you're a government, you want to make sure they align with all your policies. If you're a landowner, you want to make sure that this is the best opportunity available to you. If you're a project developer, you want to make sure that the standards are settled and that the project that you launch today, which is going to last decades, is going to endure the test of time. So we're all sort of sitting around and waiting and looking to other people to do their part and send their signals first. And I'm here to suggest to you that's not going to work, right? So yes, these rules are forming, they're happening very quickly. Daniel's going to talk about the great work of the ICVCM, but we cannot wait for the recipe to be completely perfect and for all the questions to be settled. We are in the critical years of the critical decade in the struggle to mitigate climate change for us and for future generations. So both for the sake of the planet, but also for the sake of whatever institution you represent, it is in your interest to figure out, how do you enter these markets early? How do you help shape them? How do you derive competitive advantage from them? How do you help make sure that they scale and work effectively and efficiently towards their goal? What does that look like for different groups? Project developers, we need to take more accountability for the quality issues that we have helped create and cease to tolerate low quality projects. Companies, you have to continue to demand high quality and high integrity solutions, and don't be afraid to ask the tough questions of the projects that you invest in. Investors, I get that you want certain rates of return, and I get that you want these projects to look like other projects that you're used to financing, but that's not going to happen for a few years. So you're creative people in the finance industry. We need your creativity to design new mechanisms to enable finance to flow to these projects. Julia is going to talk about one such brilliant mechanism, the Symbiosis Coalition. We need more companies to sign up for that coalition. We need more companies and investors to create other similar approaches. It's only when we're all working together that we're going to be able to achieve the potential of these markets and to more importantly, address the root problem that we're all trying to address, which is the activation of natural climate solutions and technological removal solutions at the scale that enables us to have a livable planet for future generations. Kevin, I know I went way over my time. I apologize. I did warn you I was going to do that, but I will now stop talking.
No, Nate, brilliant stuff, and I think an amen from me, and thank you so much for framing in such a astute manner, a holistic manner, and encompassing sort of the challenges, but also the opportunities that are in front of us. So more to come from Nate in the Q&A here shortly. But looking forward to turning it over now to Daniel Ortega Pacheco, who is coming today as the Executive Director of the Forest Climate Carbon Program at Michigan State University, but also the co-chair of the experts panel for the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets. And Daniel is here to talk a little bit about about all of the steps that ICVCM has been taking to ensure that that there's some standardization across the markets, and to share with us some of the great work that he and the ICVCM folks have been doing. Daniel, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you for the kind invitation. If you could please sharing the screen, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you, and let me start by saying that the ICVCM has welcomed the recent announcement by the Biden administration. We believe that we need that type of strong political silence to build the integrity that is needed. The high integrity principles for voluntary carbon markets, they can help ensure that carbon credits result in genuine reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. But let me talk a little bit more about what is the Integrity Council and the work that we have been doing. So first, let me emphasize that the voluntary carbon market is a complementary tool right? It should not replace the actions that are needed by the corporate sector to decarbonize the supply chain, but it's a necessary tool. And we need every single tool working at full speed if we want to reach the 1.5 degrees goal of the Paris Agreement. The Integrity Council is an independent, non-profit governance body of the voluntary carbon market, which aims to maximize its potential to finance climate solution. Our science-based carbon principles and rulebook established the first independent global benchmark of high-integrity carbon credit. These have been built based on best available science following extensive consultation. We are currently assessing carbon crediting programs and the methodologies they use to determine whether they meet those rules. And the carbon credits can only be tagged with the CCP label or the core carbon principles label if they tick two boxes. They must be issued by a core carbon principle eligible program and also use a CCP approved methodology. CCP eligible programs will be then responsible for using the core carbon label correctly and using CCP label credits as well. We will oversee the CCP label market to ensure integrity by auditing programs, making spot checks, and responding to issues as these arise. So this is what we frame as the voluntary carbon market 2.0, right? It builds trust, it sets the best available benchmark based on available science, and hopefully it will help us to build integrity so that the scale will follow. That's our very simple theory of change. Can we please move to the next slide? So that's essentially what we have been doing, right? We now have worked about 2 to 3 years on setting up the core carbon principles. We have initiated the assessment of those carbon credit programs. We will be issuing sometime soon in the market. You will see the initial categories being approved so that the carbon crediting programs can go about as labeling the right credits. We have done this through a very extensive public consultation at the global level, hearing from participants and providing a central piece and seat on the table for indigenous people and local communities. We have worked closely to regulators as well to understand their needs and demands. We understand that this is a challenging effort, right? Building high integrity, finding a common ground and understanding. So we will hope that this is a continuous improvement process, right? And we have initiated already workshops to continue to discuss with different stakeholders in the market, understanding best practices, what are the challenges so that we can continue to build the core carbon principles down the road in the second iteration. Next slide, please. A little bit more about us. The central element for decision-making and in our internal governance arrangement is the governing board. The governing board, as you can see, has a wide representation, not only in terms of regional representation, but also experts coming from sustainable finance, environmental NGOs, philanthropies, and expertise from broader regulations. We are very mindful of how decisions are made to ensure independence and transparency. We have participants that come from the market. These are the elected market representatives. They have a voice, but they don't have a voting right. And we have specific seats allocated to indigenous people and local communities from the different regions of the world. Next slide. We are also very proud to have in place an independent expert panel. I have the privilege to join Pedro Martins and Gabriela Abate. And what we have been able to is also join as well 12 experts, very well known in the voluntary carbon market because of the contributions they have had, the publications and the contributions to the ongoing policy debate. These are very well diverse in terms of regions and representation, and we will hope this has informed to bring the best available science to put together the core carbon principles and the rulebook. Next. So let me go have a little bit more close look on what we call the core carbon principles, right? Again, this is what we believe it sets a global benchmark to ensure integrity and the voluntary carbon market. The way that we aggregate these principles is in 3 large categories. One that addresses governance, and that is how programs operate, how they make decisions, how the standards are designed. And we include specific provisions in our rulebook with respect to effective governance, independence of board decision-making, public consultation, engaging with the different stakeholder participants, both in terms of how methodologies are developed and how they are dated across time, but most importantly, how registries are managed so that we can have a unique identifier and we can keep track that will later on help us to avoid any double counting of the use of the credits. There are specific transparency provisions to make sure that both information is publicly available, but there is also disclosure of relevant information about the projects on the ground. Lastly, we have introduced additional provisions on how to ensure robust and independent third-party validation and verification, which includes that underperforming validation bodies and verification bodies could be sanctioned if they don't perform well. Secondly, we have a set of provisions that provide full assurance with respect to technical elements that have been in the debate for quite a bit of time. This has to do with additionality, permanence, robust quantification, and no double counting, right? We need to ensure that every single credit that is in the market, regardless of the jurisdiction where this is issued, ensures that a ton is a ton. So by the time that a corporate can use it, they will know for sure that the reductions or the emission removal has take place, that they remain across time, and we can identify the risk of reversals, and there are specific provisions to manage those. But of course, at the baselines on which the projects are based and the counterfactuals that are analyzed during project development, they follow strict and robust quantification practices to ensure conservativeness, and perhaps more importantly as well, to ensure that there's no double counting. Lastly, but not least, we have also introduced and raised the bar with respect to we do control for negative impacts, and we avoid them to occur on the grounds, particularly as they speak to human rights and indigenous people. But we are also promoting that there are positive contributions with respect to sustainable development. Lastly, there are provisions as well with respect to how benefit sharing arrangements should take place, and elements to ensure that there is a contribution to the net zero transition, right? So that there is no incentive to lock in fossil fuel intensive technologies or industries. The way that the core carbon principles will play it out is that they are part of a larger ecosystem of integrity. So we work very closely with other organizations like VCMI, which has set out a specific guidance on how corporates could use these credits in a robust manner. We have cross communications with SBTI, with the Greenhouse Protocol, and CDP to ensure that the ecosystem of integrity at the end of the day will deliver an end-to-end solution to remain, again, to build trust that is needed so that we can scale up the finance for different type of mitigations, but I would say most importantly for nature climate solutions. And next. So in addition to the core carbon principles, we have introduced the notion of attributes. And these are voluntary in nature, but they provide an opportunity for those who would like to go one step forward, right? So for instance, if you would like to quantify, measure, and verify your contributions to sustainable development, and this are third-party validated, you will be able to claim an attribute to your efforts. If you are working with a program that also establishes specific provisions for a share of proceeds that are targeted to adaptation, this will also be welcome. And any other effort we expect as well to ensure that there is host country authorization pursuant to the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. These are areas that remain to future discussions as we seek forward to the next iteration of the assessment framework. Next. I wouldn't like to take much of your time. Let me just wrap up here to let you explain a little bit more on how the assessment process works, right? So let's say a standard in the United States, they submit their interest to be assessed by the Integrity Council. Then this is reviewed to confirm that they meet at the governance level, at the program level, they meet the requirements. And also then we will move into understand whether the methodologies they have available can also be in conformity with the provisions in our assessment framework. If they are approved in both areas, they can go about and issue CCP label credits. It's a very simple process, but it requires substantive analysis and independent revision throughout the process, both at the program level and the methodology level. With this, we believe investors and buyers, we have sufficient information to identify what is high integrity and where that is. Next. So having said that, I'm happy to announce that we have already approved, finalized the review and assessment of the largest carbon crediting programs operating in the market. This includes American Carbon Registry, Climate Action Reserve, Gold Standard, BCS, or also known as VERA, and the ART, which operates in the forest at the global level. We are now working to understand the quality of the methodologies, and we will hope that the initial CCP labels will be available sometime soon in the market. Next. So this is just to give you an example of how we will go about that labeling those credits. The carbon crediting programs will go about doing that labeling. And this is the first set of methodologies that we will be looking and announcing in terms of results, so that you can, the corporate sector that is willing to do ambitious climate mitigation could search for them. Next. Again, large share of the market is currently under assessment. We have excluded initially those programs that are not CORSIA eligible. We will come back to that as we finalize, but we will hope that this information is sufficient at this point of time, and you will receive more complete information by the end of September. Next. With this, as we finalize the assessment process, we will start also with our compliance and oversight. We need to assure that the provisions that have been approved continue to be faithful throughout time, and that's why we will continue to work with carbon crediting programs to make sure that they align with the ICVCM rules. This includes regularly checks, but we will also be open to receive public concerns and requests to review. Next. And let us jump. This is the assessment process that I just explained. I will leave the slide deck to be shared by wanti.org so that you can go through it in further details. I just would like to move to the next slide to share with you that our rulebook has received large support. In particular, when you coming back to the recent Biden and next slide, please. If you look at the recent announcement by the Biden administration, they have make a call to the work that we have been doing, and they have reflected on it to also promote high integrity at the domestic level, and we look forward to work with them. We continue to engage with communities around the world, and this is part of our engagement with the stakeholders. Indigenous peoples having a specific role, not only in our board. We have been able also to design and implement the first engagement forum for the indigenous people and local communities in the voluntary carbon market, that we will hope it will provide information to us as we continue to improve the best market practices available. Next. Next again. And with this, again, in addition to the recent statement by the US government to our work, we have received support from the African Carbon Market Initiative. We have seen reflected the uptake of the core carbon principles by the United Kingdom, recent consultations referring to carbon markets. The US Commodities Future Trading Commission has also reflected on our principles in the work that they are trying to do to help us to help the market move forward. And the Singapore National Authority is also reflecting on this. Next. With that, we will continue to work, finalize assessment, continue to be actively engaged, and we look forward to working with all of you to make our improvement work programs reflect the improvement and the innovation that is taking place as the introduction of the CCPs is driving institutional change. Next. With this, I will finish. I thank you for your attention. I look forward to receiving your comments and questions in the chat and coming back in the next round. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. And it's great to see so much alignment around the CCPs and government actions the world, and exciting to see this groundswell of momentum towards this integrity. So kudos to you and the experts panel and the ICVCM for advancing this work. So last but certainly not least is the perspective of the wonderful new Symbiosis Coalition, represented ably here by Julia Strong, their executive director, to talk a little bit more about how private sector is responding to some of these market signals, whether from ICVCM, from the Biden-Harris administration, and others. So Julia, thank you for being with us, and turn it over to you. Oh, you're muted.
I realize I'm muted. I was just letting you know that I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you all are seeing that now. But thank you so much, Kevin and 1T.org for hosting today, and to Nate and Daniel for your presentations that so ably set the stage. It's great to be here with you all. So Symbiosis is the advanced market commitment to catalyze the next generation of nature-based carbon removal, recently announced by Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Salesforce at the end of May. And as Kevin mentioned, my name is Julia Strong, Executive Director. So today we'll cover why Symbiosis, why was it founded, what is it, how it works, and ways to get involved. So I won't belabor this slide. I think Nate so ably described why we need to focus on nature protection and restoration. We can't meet our climate goals without it. And so the commitments by 1T.org and other folks on this call to advance nature protection and restoration are critical. And the voluntary carbon market is an important tool in our toolkit to doing that. So we know that investments in nature through the voluntary carbon market, through high quality nature-based carbon removal, in addition to protection, face a number of barriers to scale. So we're not yet at the level that we need in order to meet our climate goals. Some of these challenges are no universally accepted quality framework. The ICVCM has done amazing work to advance consistent standards, and that is rolling out across the market. But projects still vary in quality from project to project, and it's confusing about what good looks like. Sustainability teams are bandwidth limited. They don't have the resources to dig into the depth that's needed project by project, which prevents them digging into providing the time and effort to enable early stage projects to get to investment ready status. There's uncertainty about demand and the willingness to pay. Fear of public backlash from buying the wrong sets of credits and confusion about what good looks like have kept buyers from acting, leading to uncertainty about current and future demand, which has kept investors and project developers from being able to fully invest in making these projects happen at scale. It's also meant that these project developers have had difficulty accessing lower cost capital. We know that nature-based carbon removal in particular needs upfront investment, and it's really expensive to make happen. There are a variety of different capital options that could be deployed to support these projects, but because of the uncertainty around demand and willingness to pay, these investors are kept on the sidelines from deploying capital to support these projects. So Symbiosis was launched to address these challenges. We're a coalition of buyers dedicated to growing the market for high-quality nature-based carbon removal, founded by Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Salesforce, committing up to 20 million tons under contract by 2030 of the highest integrity nature-based carbon removal. The coalition aims to catalyze the supply of and unlock upfront lower cost financing for the next generation of high integrity nature-based carbon removal by sending a clear, strong demand signal and a willingness to pay the real cost it takes to make these projects happen, and providing a clarity around what good looks like and what these buyers want when it comes to quality for these projects. And then following that up with signed long-term offtake agreements that can be financed against. So Symbiosis builds on other advanced market commitments that exist to date that advance other critical climate solutions. You've likely heard of Frontier or the LEAF Coalition that focus on engineered carbon removal and avoid deforestation respectively. Symbiosis aims to complement these efforts and focus on the distinct financing challenges that are related to restoration and nature-based carbon removal, inclusive of project types like ARR, so afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation, as well as mangroves and other project types to be determined. It consists of 4 key components. I spoke a little bit about this action-oriented offtake commitment, so a commitment to go under contract for a certain volume of credits by 2030. A unified quality criteria, which I'll speak to in a minute, that helps to reduce confusion around what good looks like and what these companies want to see. A joint RFP to help members source credits, to help them meet their commitment and translate that commitment into action, and then follow that with signed offtake agreements. And finally, market development, so helping to educate project developers and investors so we can unlock that financing and get more project developers able to meet the quality criteria that these companies demand. So to go a little bit more into the offtake commitment or the volume commitment, these credits can be delivered before or after 2030. We expect that the volume of credits that can meet the quality criteria, this conservative quality criteria that these companies have made, is not large. That's why they've made this commitment to try to catalyze the supply and increase the supply of those. So expect that a lot of these credits will be delivered after 2030. Contracted credits can be a mix of pre-purchase or pay on delivery. Credits can be sourced both inside the Symbiosis RFP process and outside of that, as long as all credits contracted meet the Symbiosis quality bar. And Symbiosis will help to facilitate connections where appropriate between project developers and investors who are looking to deploy the right capital at the right time into these projects. So we wanted to help to contribute to clarity around what good looks like by building on existing market standards and by consulting with independent technical experts on what is the latest and greatest data and science tell us about the nature-based projects that can have the highest certainty of impact on the climate and also benefit Indigenous peoples and local communities. So we've aligned on overarching quality pillars that will guide the development of more project-type specific quality criteria. They build on existing standards and, when in doubt, at minimum, align with the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets core carbon principles and build on the great work that Daniel just described. These quality pillars include conservative accounting, durability, social and community benefits, so ensuring equitable engagement and equitable outcomes for Indigenous peoples and local communities throughout the duration of the project lifecycle, ecological integrity, and transparency. We know that high integrity projects, nature-based carbon removal projects that have durable climate impact have to incorporate and benefit local communities, Indigenous peoples, and also have to take into account biodiversity. So we launched with quality criteria more specific to forest restoration, reforestation, agroforestry, so ARR projects, built on the latest science and standards. You can learn more specifically about what that quality criteria is by going to our website. I'll link to that in the chat later. We based it off of Verra's upcoming Abacus label, one of those conservative standards on the market that focuses on dynamic baselining, so an innovation in the realm of additionality, conservative linkage approach, and designing for durability at the outset of the project. We have a requirement around financial transparency to evaluate benefit sharing, what proportion of financial benefits actually end up in the hands of local communities, alignment with the CCB label to ensure benefits beyond carbon, ensure equitable engagement and outcomes for IPs and LCs, as well as positive outcomes for biodiversity. And in addition, we have a preference for native species and contribution to the global biodiversity framework. We consulted with a variety of scientists and experts to come up with this quality criteria, folks from the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, industry experts, as well as academia. We're committed to continually raise the bar on quality and work with others in the market to advance consistent standards, share our lessons learned, and evaluate impact over time. We're committed to recruit a financially disinterested technical advisory board and work with other experts to advise the coalition and its members over time, reviewing our quality criteria at least once annually to incorporate developments in science and data, publish guidance and lessons learned, and contribute to advancing consistent and updated standards and guidance throughout the market, and publish those lessons learned and guidance to help more project developers and other market actors secure projects that result in high certainty of impact on the climate. We'll focus our initial joint RFPs on first ARR. We expect that RFP to be published sometime this year, and the next one will be on mangroves, which we expect sometime the following year. We aim to work with investors and project developers to educate them about our quality criteria and RFP process and make connections to existing resources and support. So for investors, we'd like to educate them about the quality criteria we're looking for and make connections to project developers that we know of and that can meet the symbiosis criteria, quality criteria, who are seeking risk-adjusted financing, trying to unlock lower cost financing by connecting these two groups. And for project developers, we want to help more project developers meet our quality bar. So educating them about the symbiosis quality criteria, making introductions to investors where appropriate, and connecting projects that aren't quite RFP ready with known technical advisory support to help them get to investment ready status. So we are excited to get involved with a variety of different actors, some of whom I'm sure are on the call today. For buyers, we want to include more buyers in the coalition, increase the impact of this demand signal, help to share lessons learned, and work together to scale the market. So you can learn more about joining the Symbiosis Coalition. For developers, we'd love to engage with you about our upcoming ARRFP. So if you'd like to receive more information and be kept up to date as we develop that, please go see the email there. And for investors, if you'd like to learn more about how we're thinking about partnering with investors to connect with future Symbiosis projects, please go there as well. So thank you so much for the time today. As Nate so ably mentioned, we don't have time to wait. We have to start acting now. And Symbiosis Coalition is excited to work with other market actors and actors across the ecosystem to catalyze the supply that we need to have the biggest impact we can on the climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and I'm so excited about this, and thank you for your leadership in this. And I especially love sort of the shared knowledge and the continual learnings here. I think this is part of the drumbeat is that we're all in this together, and that there's no need to sort of balkanize this data and this knowledge. It's about sort of building a strong, credible marketplace for all participants. So appreciate that from the top to the bottom of our panelists today, that spirit of continued improvement and learning. So now we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A and for discussion. So I wanted to start with kind of a big picture one, and folks, please feel free to put questions in the chat. So thinking back a year and where the markets were in 2023, thinking where we are now, let's put on our prognosticator's hat. Where would you like a Wall Street Journal headline to, what would you like a Wall Street Journal headline to read a year from now about the progress that we've made in the markets? Nate, start with you.
Oof, I only get one headline, huh? That's a good question.
I'll give you the first paragraph of the lead too, if you want.
Okay. I think I would want the headline to be about ultimately what history will judge this market based on, which is how effective was it at transferring finance to projects that needed it, right? So that I'd want that headline to be in the multiple billions of dollars that have been transacted to get projects off the ground to begin to build the pipeline for nature-based solutions. In that first paragraph, I would like it to talk about how all of the various critics and skeptics of the market have shifted from arguing over whether carbon markets should exist to arguing about how to make them work. And Mark Carney had a great editorial, I think in today's Financial Times. I'd recommend it to everyone, that basically made this point. Carbon markets aren't perfect, but if you have ideas and thoughts about how to improve them, those ideas and thoughts are welcome, but it's time for us all to get on board with operationalizing this as a climate solution. So that would be my sub-wish to that larger overall headline.
Brilliant. Daniel.
Thank you, Kevin. I think we would like to see the uptake of the high integrity principles being deployed across the world, so that in the Conference of the Party in Brazil next year, the announcement is that we have ensured full interoperability between compliance and voluntary carbon markets. We believe that's possible if we follow similar principles on integrity as we have proposed on the Integrity Council of the Voluntary Carbon Market. The recent announcement that the US provide us a signal that is possible, right? So if fungibility is ensured, right, a ton is a ton, and then liquidity kicks in because of the scale finance that Nathan has suggested with price forwarding mechanism or future contracting, I think we will be in a right situation. Whether the financial integrity, and that is the governance of the entire system, clicks together, that's the announcement that we would like to see coming up by the COP in Brazil.
Julia.
I'd love to see those headlines, but to follow up from that, I'd love to also see examples of specific projects that are getting more financing, like more announcements that we saw yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about Microsoft's big offtake agreement in Brazil. I'd love to see more companies in Symbiosis Coalition and Leaf Coalition and these other advanced market commitments for all the different solutions that we need, stepping up to work together to demonstrate demand and sign long-term agreements that are going to bring in the financing needed. I'd also love to see announcements of other innovative financing mechanisms to lower the cost of capital to get more done for less money. We wanted the most efficient deployment of funds as possible. So things like the MOMBAC bond that we saw, the World Bank Outcomes Bond with MOMBAC, would love to see other green bonds deployed for nature-based carbon projects as well.
Fantastic. I hope that our prognosticators are accurate and that these will be the headlines we see next year. We'll go to a couple questions here in the chat from Julia about the symbiosis type projects and about the flexibility, about mixed ARR, avoided deforestation, and then about conservation. Could you talk a little bit more about sort of the philosophical approach that Symbiosis is taking on removals versus conservation and your portfolio?
Absolutely. So I was very purposefully said that we need both. We need protection and restoration. We're not going to meet our climate goals if we don't protect our forests. And we also need to start restoring forests and restoring nature now to draw down the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So we need both. Symbiosis was formed as a complement to the existing AMCs on the market or advanced market commitments on the market, Leaf Coalition being the one that's focused on avoided deforestation and jurisdictional REDD+, acknowledging that there are other forms of protection projects. And that projects can include both protection and restoration, that it's not so simple as to split the two. So we'll be figuring out what's our approach to projects that include both. And we want to be able to spur investment in projects that take a holistic approach to supporting nature protection and restoration. And we'll be working through that over time, how we approach projects that have elements of both removals and avoidance. But we know we need to do both collectively as a society.
Thanks, Julia. So for everyone, thinking a little bit more broadly, the conversations around Article 6, specifically around 6.4 at the upcoming COP. Daniel, Nathan, can you talk a little bit more about how you see the Article 6 negotiations playing out and the implications for this market? Daniel, start with you.
I'm happy to jump in. So we have seen some progress in the recent subsidiary body meetings, right, in Bonn, with respect to the progress on this area. I personally think that the core carbon principles have provided additional information, right? And I see a complementary nature of the work on 6.4 and what we do. So when you look at the sustainable development tool that is being discussed under Article 6.4, we see great improvement, great ambition, and we would like to really see that comes around by the time that we get to this year's COP. But at the end of the day, what we've seen is great similarity and great complementarity in terms of how integrity is addressed. And that will be the central element. The second will be how we make arrangements to ensure that interoperability between the compliance markets and those under the voluntary carbon market, particularly with respect to specific provisions that can help us ensure that ITMOs, and that is the International Transfer Mitigation Units, is a common language, is commonly agreed and used, and is very well settled to avoid any potential double counting. I think that is a central concern for all of us.
Yeah, just I don't have any knowledge even approaching Daniel's of Article 6. The one thing I will say though is if you compare the answer he just gave to the answer that he would have given a year ago, it's much more hopeful. And I just want to underline that is, I believe, because of the work that the private market has done through ICVCM and others to rapidly explore some of the issues that are thorny and that were obstacles to agreement, right? So I think my advice to anyone on this call is this is a great example of where if we all wait for the negotiators to come up and build the perfect system, we'll be waiting until 2040. What we need to do is design systems, rapidly implement them, iterate, learn, like Julia said, share the areas where we failed, and demonstrate to everyone this is how to do it. And then the negotiators, I believe, will follow behind the example that we have set. And so we have the ability to demonstrate the rule book rather than wait for it to be written, is the way I think about it.
Julia?
I guess I would just +1 to what Nate said. You know, you can already see how regulators are pointing to the ICVCM and the work that they're doing, filling the void and the gap. And, you know, that's one of the voluntary carbon markets roles can be to test things and innovate, and that can then be brought into compliance. So, you know, I think that this iteration being a feature, not a bug, is critical, and holding ourselves accountable to that iteration is important.
Brilliant. Well, I want to focus one question here from Sujoy in the chat here around safeguarding land tenure and providing equitable long-term co-benefits for local communities, indigenous people. Again, we all talked a little bit about these as kind of the core principles, and Julia, you alluded to, again, sort of some of the specific projects here. Would love to talk a little bit more in depth about safeguarding those rights, and start with you, Julia, and then Daniel and Nate.
It's critical. Without doing that at the start of the design of a project, there's no chance of long-term success for these projects. So not only is it the right thing to do, the just thing to do, it's critical for the success of the delivery of the carbon benefits that we're relying on. So Symbiosis Coalition was in working with external independent experts, wanted to build on existing standards, but also identify ways that we can go above and beyond. And we're very clear to say that we want to have both a plan to engage indigenous peoples and local communities throughout the life cycle of the project. So prior to the project starting, in implementation, and during monitoring, as well as having evidence that that plan is being implemented on an ongoing basis. We point to the CCB label, we point to the ICVCM's core carbon principles. We also add additional layer of financial transparency being a key part of understanding what proportion of benefits are actually reaching the ground to these local communities. So it has to be a part of project design and implementation on an ongoing basis, or these projects won't be successful and we won't get the impact we need, and part of the big benefits of these projects, which is supporting these indigenous peoples and local communities.
Thank you. I think that Julia has pointed right to this area. I would simply add, when you look at the core carbon principles, right, we have introduced for the first time a common set of safeguards that should be followed, right? And this includes safeguarding and avoiding harm in human rights and indigenous people and communities, including through free, prior, and informed consent. But it's not only necessarily to do no harm. I think that the right thing is to also to move to positive impacts. And the CCPs do promote that if you do that, you can have access to an external validator and have that certified and receive the attribute, right? So that's already setting a new threshold. The CCPs also introduced a grievance mechanism. So if for some reason a project is found by a community to be affecting them, it is of course needed to have that resource. And finally, it's something that we are working at Michigan State Forest Carbon Climate Program, is to also scale up the tools and the capacities for this to be deployed rapidly across the world, right? So we do not only need the right governance and rules, we also need to transfer that knowledge and increase the capacities in the public. And we really look forward to continue collaborating with many of you on doing that.
Brilliant. Nate, we'll give you the last word. Yeah,
Or I think you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now? My Zoom malfunctioned, as I warned you guys before the call, but hopefully this will work. Buyers and investors have a role here. I think it's underreported. All of the quality safeguards that we just talked about, guess what they do to the price of carbon credits? They drive them up, right? Where you see projects that fail on this, it's usually not because the project developer is out with a motivation to create harm in local communities. It's because they're trying to figure out how to make a project work for $2 a ton. And the answer is you can't, right? You have to figure out ways to cut corners. So the number one way that buyers and investors can support those safeguards is to be willing to pay for them. So that's really important. Don't demand things that you're not willing to pay for, would be my final message there.
Brilliant. Well, we are at time. I think we could probably have this dialogue for another hour at least, but would look forward to continuing this dialogue with Nate, with Daniel, with Julia, with all of you throughout the year at 1t.org/us.org and via our community collaborative that will be meeting virtually and in person at Climate Week, at COP16, the Biodiversity COP, and beyond. So on behalf of the 1t.org US Coalition, we encourage you to make a pledge to join us, to be counted as leaders for forests and climate and biodiversity and people here at the 1t.org US. And it's sincere thank you to Nate, to Daniel, to Julia, and for all of you all for helping advance the markets as far as they've come this year, and much more work to do over the next. So roll up your sleeves and join us, and thank you all for being with us today.